The world into which a boy was born in medieval times was seldom gentle, and yet it was full of meaning from the very first breath. In a dimly lit chamber where smoke clung to the rafters and wind pressed through the cracks of timber or stone, a child's cry would rise into the air, fragile but insistent. It was a sound that carried both hope and uncertainty, for not all children who entered the world would remain in it long enough to grow into their names. Around the mother, figures moved in quiet urgency. Midwives and kin, women hardened by their own experiences of birth and loss, worked with steady hands and murmured prayers under their breath. Water was warmed over fire, cloths were prepared, and herbs were kept close in case fate proved unkind. The father, if present, often stood at a distance or waited just beyond the doorway, listening to the sound that would tell him whether his line would continue or falter. In many homes, this moment was both celebration and quiet bargaining with fortune. If the child lived through those first fragile hours, there was little certainty in what followed. Infancy in the medieval world was a narrow bridge over deep waters, and many did not cross it. Illness came easily, and medicine was as much prayer and tradition as it was knowledge. Still, when a boy survived, even for a single day, he was already part of a chain that stretched backward through generations and forward into an unknown future. His name might be chosen quickly, often drawn from saints, ancestors, or hopes for virtue and strength. It was spoken over him in baptism, where water and ritual marked his place not only in the household, but in the spiritual order of the world. From that moment, he was seen as belonging to something larger than himself, a family line, a village, a trade, a faith. The room where he lay was not built for comfort in the modern sense, but it held the rhythm of life all the same. Hearth smoke warmed the space, animals might be housed nearby in colder months, and the sounds of work never truly ceased. Outside, the world continued its cycles of planting and harvest, of tax and duty, of market days and feasts, unaware of the small life beginning within. For those who looked upon the child, there was often a quiet weight in their gaze. A son meant labor for the fields, strength for the workshop, protection for aging parents, and continuation of a name that might otherwise fade. Even before he could speak, expectations gathered around him like the folds of a woven cloth. And yet, in those earliest days, none of this was yet his burden. He was only breath and warmth, sleeping and waking in a rhythm shaped by hunger and comfort. His world was small, but it was filled with hands that lifted him, voices that soothed him, and a fragile place in the heart of a household that had learned through many seasons how easily life could slip away. So it began, as it always did in those centuries, not with certainty, but with endurance. A boy entered the world beneath heavy beams and flickering light, and in that beginning lay the quiet unfolding of a life that would be shaped by earth, faith, labor, and time itself.
In the years that followed a boy's fragile first days, life did not soften so much as it gradually revealed its shape. Childhood in the medieval world was not held apart as a long, protected season, but rather folded into the rhythm of work, faith, and daily survival. A boy learned early that he was not separate from the world of adults, but already a part of it in training, expected to grow into his place as naturally as grain rising in the field. In the earliest years, there was still a brief tenderness. A mother or older sibling might hold him close beside the hearth, humming low songs as bread baked or water simmered. He would learn the faces of those who fed him, the sound of his name, and the difference between warmth and cold. But even these early comforts were interwoven with discipline. Silence was expected when elder spoke, obedience was praised, and missteps were corrected quickly, sometimes with sharp words, sometimes with firmer hands. By the time he could walk with steadier steps, the world beyond the threshold became his classroom. A boy in a peasant household was soon set to small tasks, carrying bundles of kindling, fetching water from the well, watching geese or sheep, or helping to gather scattered straw after the animals had passed. At first, these tasks were light, almost like play, but they carried within them the first lessons of responsibility. He was taught that nothing in the household sustained itself without effort. In towns, a boy's lessons took a different shape. He might be sent to live in another household entirely, bound by agreement to a master craftsman. There, childhood bent toward apprenticeship. The boy rose early, long before the sun fully reached the streets, and his days were filled with repetition, sweeping floors, carrying tools, fetching materials, observing hands that shaped wood, iron, or cloth into things of use and beauty. Mistakes were not gently excused, they were corrected until remembered.
In noble households, lessons were quieter but no less exacting. A boy might serve as a page, learning how to move through halls with care, how to bow at the right moment, how to speak when spoken to. He learned horsemanship, the handling of weapons in practice, the rules of courtly behavior, and the rhythms of prayer. Even play was shaped with purpose as mock training for the roles he would one day be expected to fulfill. Across all stations, the world of childhood was never free from the presence of death. Illness could sweep through homes without warning, and not every sibling or playmate remained. Boys learned to see absence early, though rarely were they taught to speak of it aloud. Instead, life continued forward, as it always had, carrying both memory and necessity in the same steady motion. Time itself seemed to move differently in those years. Seasons were measured not by calendars, but by planting and harvest, by the arrival of cold winds or the return of birds. A boy might notice one day that his hands were larger, his steps heavier, his voice less high than it once had been. There was no single moment when childhood ended. It simply loosened its hold, replaced gradually by expectation. And so, without ceremony or announcement, the boy began to understand his place in the world more clearly. He was not only a child of a household, but a pair of hands that would one day labor, a body that would carry burden, a name that would continue forward or be forgotten. In that slow unfolding, childhood became not a refuge, but a preparation, quiet, persistent, and already turning him toward the life that waited ahead. In the countryside, where most lives in the medieval world were rooted, a boy's world narrowed early to the reach of fields, fences, and weathered hands. The land was not merely where life took place, it was the force that shaped it, governed it, and demanded it in return. For a peasant boy, growing up meant learning to read the earth as carefully as others read sacred texts, for his survival depended upon it. From an early age, he followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring was preparation, when soil was broken and seed was sown beneath uncertain skies. Summer was endurance, when weeds had to be pulled and animals tended under a rising sun that offered little mercy. Autumn was gathering, when every hand, no matter how small, was needed to bring in what the year had yielded. Winter was restraint, when food was measured carefully and work shifted indoors, repairing tools, tending animals, and waiting for the land to awaken again. A boy's hands grew rough quickly in such a life. What began as simple chores, fetching water, gathering firewood, chasing chickens from garden rows, gradually expanded into true labor. He learned to guide a plow behind an ox or horse, feeling the weight of resistance in the soil. He learned to scatter seed with a practiced motion, to judge weather by the feel of wind and sky, to recognize when a field would thrive or fail. These were not lessons taught in words alone, but in repetition, correction, and necessity. There was little separation between work and upbringing. A father did not pause his labor to instruct in formal terms. Instead, the boy learned by standing beside him, mirroring his movements, absorbing the quiet discipline of endurance. A mother, too, shaped his understanding of work, managing hearth and household with constant attention, teaching him that survival extended beyond the fields into every corner of daily life.
Yet, even within this unrelenting rhythm, there were moments that belonged to the boy alone. Brief instants of play appeared between tasks. Carved sticks turned into swords, stones into cattle, open fields into imagined kingdoms. But even play was often tied to imitation of adult life, as if preparation could never fully be set aside. The land itself was both provider and judge. A good harvest brought relief and modest abundance. A poor one brought hunger that pressed against every household equally. In such times, a boy learned the meaning of scarcity before he ever understood its name. He would see bread divided more thinly, hear quieter conversations at the hearth, notice the absence of certain foods that had once been common. These lessons settled into him without explanation, becoming part of his understanding of the world. As he grew, so too did his responsibility. He was no longer only a helper, but a necessary presence in the labor of survival. The strength of his body became a resource, and its development was watched with quiet approval. Each year that passed marked not only his aging, but his increasing value to the household's endurance. And yet, for all its hardship, life in the soil held a kind of continuity that few other lives possessed. The same fields were worked by fathers, sons, and grandsons. The same tools were passed down, repaired, and used again. A boy was not simply growing up, he was becoming part of a cycle far older than himself, one that turned with the seasons and would continue long after his own hands had joined it. In this way, the sons of the soil were shaped slowly but firmly, not by sudden moments or grand declarations, but by repetition, necessity, and the steady pull of the earth beneath their feet. Beyond the quiet fields and scattered hamlets, where the roads widened and the air grew thick with the scent of smoke, metal, and commerce, towns offered a different path for a boy's life to unfold. Here, childhood did not bend toward the soil, but toward the workshop, where hands were trained not to coax life from earth, but to shape it from raw material into something made. A boy sent to a town as an apprentice often left his family behind at a young age. The decision was rarely gentle, though it was commonly understood. In many households there were too many mouths and too few opportunities. A trade promised survival, and survival required sacrifice. So the boy would arrive at the door of a master craftsman, carrying little more than his name and the agreement that bound him to years of labor and instruction. The household he entered was not his own, though he would live within it as if it were. He slept in shared quarters or small corners of the workshop, rising before the city fully stirred. His days began with sweeping ash from the forge, carrying water, stoking fires, or preparing tools before the master arrived. The work was constant, and the learning was slow, absorbed through watching, repeating, and enduring correction.
In the blacksmith's shop, the air was heavy with heat and hammering iron. Sparks burst like brief stars in dim interiors. The boy learned to fear fire not as an enemy, but as a force to be respected and controlled. In the carpenter's workshop, wood filled the air with sharp, clean scent as beams and planks were measured, cut, and joined with precision. In bakeries, flour dust clung to clothing and skin, and ovens demanded early rising and unending attention. Each craft had its own rhythm, its own demands, its own quiet discipline.
The master craftsman was both teacher and authority, and his expectations were absolute. Mistakes were corrected immediately, often without softness. A poorly measured cut, a misplaced tool, or an incomplete task might be met with sharp words or harsher consequences. Yet beneath the severity was a system that shaped skill through repetition, and over time the boy's hands began to learn what his mind had not yet fully understood. Guilds governed much of this world, though a young apprentice would feel their presence more than their structure. They set rules for training, standards for work, and the long path required to move from apprentice to journeyman. Years passed within this system, each one marked not by freedom, but by increasing responsibility and expectation. Outside the workshop, the town moved in its own crowded rhythm. Narrow streets carried merchants, laborers, travelers, and livestock in constant motion. Bells marked time, markets filled squares, and news traveled through word of mouth faster than any written record. For a boy far from home, the town could feel both vast and confined, full of possibility, yet bound tightly by obligation. Still, there were moments that softened the edges of this life. A finished object held in hand for the first time, a rare word of approval from a master, a shared meal among apprentices at the end of a long day. These small recognitions became anchors in a life otherwise defined by labor. As years passed, the boy changed. His body strengthened from repetition, his movements became more precise, his understanding of his craft deepened. He was no longer merely a helper in the workshop, but something closer to a maker in training, slowly stepping toward the identity that would define his adult life. And so, in the towns, under the watchful eye of masters and the steady discipline of craft, boys were shaped not by fields or seasons, but by fire, wood, stone, and time itself, becoming men not in sudden transformation, but in the gradual forging of skill and endurance. In the great halls of stone and timber, where banners hung heavy with lineage and carved beams stretched high above polished floors, the sons of nobility grew up in a world that seemed distant from the soil and the smoke of common life. Yet even here, beneath gilded ceilings and beside roaring hearths, childhood was not a season of ease so much as one of shaping, refined, directed, and carefully bound to duty. A noble boy's earliest years were often spent within the protective reach of a household that understood both privilege and danger. He was surrounded by attendants, nurses, tutors, and servants who ensured his comfort, yet also guided his every movement. Even play carried a sense of purpose. Wooden swords were placed in small hands not only for amusement, but as early preparation for the responsibilities that bloodline demanded. As he grew, he was often sent to serve in another noble household, or within his own as a page. There, childhood took on a more formal rhythm. He learned to move through long corridors with quiet steps, to bow at the correct angle, to speak only when addressed, and to observe before acting. Every gesture was part of a larger education in control of body, voice, and presence.
The great hall itself became a classroom. Feasts were lessons in etiquette, where silence and speech were equally measured. Court gatherings taught him how status shaped every interaction, how a misplaced word could ripple through alliances, and how reputation was as valuable as land or coin. Even the arrangement of seating at table, the order of entry into a room, and the manner of greeting guests all held meaning that he was expected to absorb without explanation.
Beyond the hall, his training extended into more physical pursuits. Horsemanship was essential, for a nobleman's identity was closely tied to his ability to ride. He learned to sit a saddle with balance and command, to guide a horse in motion, and to understand the animal not as a tool, but as a partner in both travel and war. Hunting followed, offering both practice in tracking and a display of skill, patience, and control. Forests became places of instruction as much as recreation. Religion, too, was woven deeply into his upbringing. He attended daily prayers, learned scripture, and was taught to see his position as part of a divinely ordered world. Chapels within castles or nearby abbeys shaped his understanding of authority, not only as inherited, but as sanctioned by something higher than earthly rule. Yet, for all its refinement, noble childhood was not free from discipline. Tutors demanded mastery of reading, writing, and arithmetic, as well as knowledge of history, lineage, and law. Failure was met with correction, and expectations were constant. The weight of inheritance pressed early upon him, for he was not simply growing into adulthood, but into a role that carried the fate of lands and people. In quieter moments, when training paused and the halls fell into softer light, there were glimpses of something closer to ordinary childhood. Laughter among fellow pages, moments of mischief, whispered conversations away from watchful eyes. But even these were shaped by awareness of rank and future responsibility. Friendship existed, but always within the boundaries of hierarchy. As the years passed, the boy's posture changed, his speech became more measured, and his understanding of the world grew increasingly tied to duty and expectation. He was no longer simply a child within a noble household, but a figure in preparation, a page standing at the threshold of knighthood, leadership, and inheritance. And so, within the echoing halls of power, noble sons were formed not in isolation from responsibility, but directly within it, their childhood slowly refined into the shape of the roles they were destined to carry, long before they ever fully understood the weight of them. In the medieval world, there was no life untouched by the turning of weather or the uncertainty of harvest. Whether a man worked the land, shaped iron in a town, or served within the walls of a noble house, the seasons held authority over all. They did not arrive gently, nor did they leave quietly. Instead, they pressed upon every household with the quiet force of inevitability, shaping hunger, labor, and hope in equal measure. Spring often arrived as a fragile promise. Fields softened from winter's grip, and the first signs of green pushed through soil that had long lain dormant. Yet even in this renewal, there was no certainty. Frost could return without warning, killing what had just begun to grow. Rain might come too heavily, drowning seeds before they could take root, or too sparingly, leaving the earth cracked and unwilling. For those who lived close to the land, spring was never simply a beginning, it was a test of survival yet again. Summer brought labor without pause. The sun rose early and lingered long, pressing heat onto backs bent in the fields or over workshops. Men and boys worked until exhaustion became familiar, their bodies adjusting to fatigue as if it were another season entirely. Water was carried from wells or streams, shared carefully, never wasted. Even rest came with urgency, for there was always more to be done before the next change in weather arrived. But it was autumn that held both relief and tension in equal measure. Harvest determined whether a household would endure the coming months or struggle through scarcity. Every hand capable of working was called upon, from the youngest boys to the oldest men still able to stand in the fields. Grain was gathered, fruit picked, and stores prepared with careful attention. A successful harvest brought a brief easing of worry, but even then, the memory of past shortages lingered like a shadow.
Winter, however, was the true measure of endurance. It arrived with cold winds that crept through walls and beneath doors, finding every weakness in a home's structure. Food became measured with caution, stored carefully, rationed slowly. Firewood was precious, gathered long before it was needed, and guarded closely once it was burned. In many households, people gathered near the hearth not only for warmth, but for survival itself. In such seasons, hunger was not an abstract idea, but a familiar presence. It was felt in empty stomachs, in quieter meals, in the thinning of livestock that could no longer be sustained. A poor harvest or harsh winter could ripple through entire communities, leaving some families dependent on the generosity of neighbors or the mercy of lords. Even in better years, the memory of scarcity shaped how food was treated, never wasted, never taken for granted. Weather, too, was spoken of with a kind of reverence. Storms could destroy roofs, flood fields, and erase months of labor in a single night. Drought could turn fertile land to dust, forcing migration or dependence on distant aid. There was no escaping its influence. Instead, people learned to read its signs, the color of the sky, the direction of wind, the behavior of animals, all observed with careful attention. And yet, within these hardships, life continued with a quiet persistence. Children still played between tasks, marriages still took place in better seasons, and stories were still told by firelight when winter closed the world in around them. Even in hunger there was structure. Even in hardship there was rhythm. A man's strength in such a world was measured not only by his ability to work, but by his endurance what could not be controlled. Seasons would come and go, often without regard for human need or expectation. And through them, lives were shaped slowly, marked not by ease, but the steady negotiation between effort and uncertainty, hope and survival. In every corner of the medieval world, faith was not a separate thread of life, but the very fabric through which all other things were understood. A man did not step outside of religion to live his days. Rather, he moved within it, as though the world itself had been placed gently within sacred hands. From the moment of birth to the moment of burial, every stage of life was marked by prayer, ritual, and the steady presence of the church. The sound of bells was among the first rhythms a boy would come to know. They marked the passing of hours not by numbers, but by devotion. Morning prayers, midday reflection, evening rest, all were called into order by their ringing. In villages, towns, and castles alike, the bells reminded all who heard them that time was not their own, but part of a greater structure ordained beyond human reach. For boys growing into men, faith was taught early and without separation from daily life. The words of prayers were learned as carefully as any trade or skill. Stories of saints in Scripture filled long evenings, shaping imagination as much as belief. A child might hear of humble shepherds visited by angels, of martyrs who endured suffering without turning away from their devotion, of miracles that defied explanation yet were accepted as truth woven into the world. Churches stood at the center of most communities, not only physically but spiritually. Stone buildings rose above surrounding homes, their presence constant and enduring. Inside, candlelight flickered across worn stone and painted glass, casting shifting colors across kneeling figures. Here, men confessed their faults, sought forgiveness, and placed their fears into words spoken quietly before an altar. The weight of sin was not an abstract concept, but something felt deeply, as real as hunger or fatigue.
For many men, faith offered both comfort and discipline. It gave structure to suffering, meaning to loss, and hope to uncertainty. A failed harvest, a sudden illness, or the death of a loved one was often understood not as randomness, but as part of a divine pattern too large to see fully. This understanding did not erase grief, but it placed it within a larger frame, one that stretched beyond a single lifetime. Pilgrimages were undertaken by some, journeys made on foot across long distances toward holy sites. These travels were acts of devotion and endurance, often undertaken in hope of healing, forgiveness, or gratitude. Along the road, men walked alongside strangers bound by the same unseen longing, sharing food, stories, and hardship under the same open sky. Faith also shaped authority. Kings ruled with the belief that their power was granted by divine will, and lords often saw their responsibilities as part of a sacred order. Even the labor of common men was not viewed as separate from this structure. To work the land, to craft tools, to raise families, all were seen as part of a larger design in which every role had meaning. Yet faith was not without its quiet struggles. Questions sometimes lingered unspoken in the hearts of men who endured suffering year after year. Prayers were offered in hope and in fear, in gratitude and in uncertainty. Still, even doubt rarely led to departure. Instead, it coexisted with belief, held together by tradition, community, and the deep-rooted sense that life was part of something far greater than what could be seen or touched. In the end, faith in the medieval world was not merely a matter of belief, but of presence. It shaped how men rose in the morning, how they worked through the day, how they faced hardship, and how they prepared for rest. It was in the words spoken over fields, the blessings whispered before meals, and the final prayers said beside those who neared their end. And so, beneath the shadow of steeples and the echo of bells, men lived their lives within a world where the sacred and the ordinary were never far apart, each reflecting the other like light through stained glass, fragile, enduring, and ever-present. In the medieval world, there was rarely a single moment when boyhood ended and manhood began. Instead, it arrived slowly, like the changing of a season that is only recognized in hindsight. A boy did not wake one morning and find himself a man. Rather, he noticed over time that the world had begun to respond to him differently, as if his presence now carried weight where once it had not. The earliest signs often came through labor. In the fields, he was no longer guided through simple tasks, but entrusted with work that required endurance and judgment. The plough felt less foreign in his hands. The rhythm of sowing and reaping became familiar rather than learned. What once required correction now required only instruction, and then, eventually, no words at all. He simply knew what to do. In towns, apprentices found themselves gradually granted more responsibility. A task that once required supervision might now be completed alone. Tools were placed in their hands with expectation rather than caution. The master's eye still watched, but less closely, as skill replaced hesitation. In this quiet shift, the boy stepped further into the life he had been training for since his arrival. Among noble households, the transition carried a more formal weight, though still gradual in feeling. A page might become a squire, stepping closer to the world of knighthood. He learned to care for armor and weapons, to tend horses with greater responsibility, and to accompany his lord more directly in matters of travel or duty. He was no longer simply observing the world of power, but beginning to participate in it.
There were also moments that marked passage in quieter, more personal ways. A boy might receive his first wages, however small, and feel the strange independence of coin earned by his own effort. He might be entrusted with traveling alone to a nearby village or speaking on behalf of his household in small matters. Each of these experiences added another layer to his identity, even if no ceremony declared it so. Marriage, too, played a role in this transition for many. Often arranged through family or community ties, it signaled not only companionship but responsibility. To become a husband was to take on the burden of providing, protecting, and continuing a household line. In that role, boyhood faded further into memory, replaced by the steady demands of adult life. There were also rites less formal, but deeply felt. The first time a young man was called upon to stand in defense of his home or village. The first time he took part in a hunt, not as observer, but as participant. The first time he was addressed not as a child, but as one whose voice might be listened to in matters of importance. These moments accumulated quietly, shaping how he understood himself. Yet, even as these changes took place, there was no clean separation between past and present. Childhood did not vanish. It lingered in memory, in habits, in the way a man sometimes still hesitated before speaking or looked instinctively toward elders for confirmation. Growth did not erase what came before, it layered itself upon it. And so, becoming a man in the medieval world was not a single step, but a long unfolding. It was the gradual acceptance of responsibility, the steady increase of expectation, and the quiet realization that life was no longer something being prepared for, but something already being lived in full.
In the medieval world, the day began before the sun had fully risen, when darkness still clung to the edges of the sky. Men woke not to leisure, but to necessity, moving from sleep into labor with little pause between the two. The rhythm of life allowed no separation. Work was not something one did, but something one lived within. In the countryside, the first movements of the day centered around the hearth. Embers were stirred back to life, simple food was prepared, and tools were gathered. Soon after, men stepped into the open air, where fields stretched wide and waiting. The land did not concern itself with fatigue. It required effort whether the body was ready or not. Farming shaped the longest hours. Soil had to be broken, seed scattered, weeds cleared, and harvest gathered when the time came. Each task followed the season, yet none allowed delay. Animals needed feeding, fences required mending, and water had to be carried. The work was constant, and its repetition gave structure to each day. In towns, the rhythm changed, but the demand remained. Workshops filled with sound early, hammer striking iron, saw cutting wood, wheels turning in steady motion.
Craftsmen worked with focus, their hands repeating movements learned through years of practice. Bakers tended ovens before dawn, while merchants arranged goods in preparation for trade. Each man's labor fed into the life of the town, connecting individual effort to a larger whole. For those in service to noble households, work followed the movement of others. Meals were prepared, rooms maintained, fires kept burning. There was always something unfinished, something requiring attention. Precision mattered, and tasks were carried out with care under watchful eyes. Across all lives, time was measured by light. As the sun climbed, labor deepened. As it lowered, urgency grew. What remained undone would wait, but not disappear. Rest came only when darkness made further work impossible. Breaks were brief and practical, a piece of bread eaten standing, a drink of water taken quickly, a moment to lean before returning to effort. Conversation, when it came, stayed close to necessity, weather, tools, tasks. Even laughter was woven into work, not set apart from it. Over time, the body adjusted. Strength grew, endurance settled in, and what once felt heavy became familiar. Labor did not lessen, but it became understood, part of the shape of life itself. And so each day moved from dawn to dark in steady repetition. The sun rose, the work began, and by nightfall it ended only long enough to begin again. In this rhythm, men did not simply pass time, they were carried by it, shaped by its demands, and defined by their ability to endure it.
When the day's labor finally loosened its grip, men turned not toward solitude, but toward one another. In a world shaped by effort and endurance, companionship offered a quiet kind of relief, not by removing hardship, but by sharing it. As evening settled, many gathered in familiar places where the weight of the day could be set down, if only briefly. Taverns and common rooms filled with voices, the air warm with firelight and the scent of ale. Wooden benches creaked beneath tired bodies, and for a time hands that had worked without rest could be still. Ale was shared not as indulgence alone, but as part of the rhythm of rest. Cups passed between men who had spent the same hours in fields, workshops, or service. Around them, conversation moved easily. Stories of the day, small complaints, bits of news carried from nearby places. Laughter rose more freely here, softening the edges of fatigue. Friendship often grew from shared labor. Men who worked side by side came to understand one another without need for many words. They knew the weight of the same tools, the strain of the same seasons, the quiet satisfaction of work completed. In that understanding, a kind of brotherhood formed, simple, steady, and unspoken. Guilds in towns strengthened these bonds further. Craftsmen gathered not only to regulate their trade, but to share meals, observe traditions, and support one another. Within these circles, identity was shaped not only by skill, but by belonging. There were also days set aside for gathering beyond the ordinary. Feast days brought communities together in celebration, where food was shared more generously and music carried through open spaces. For a brief time, the strict rhythm of work softened, and men stood not only as laborers, but as part of something collective and enduring. Yet companionship was not limited to these larger moments. It lived as well in quieter exchanges, a shared meal at day's end, a brief conversation in passing, a helping hand offered without expectation. These small acts carried meaning, even if they were rarely spoken of. In such a life where hardship was constant, the presence of others offered something steady. It did not change the work that awaited the next day, but it made it easier to bear. And so, in the spaces between labor, men found one another, not in escape from their world, but within it, sharing time, voice, and presence in a way that quietly sustained them. Marriage marked a turning point in a man's life, where responsibility deepened and his place in the world became more firmly defined. It was not simply a union of two individuals, but the joining of households, labor, and future generations. Often arranged through family or community ties, marriage was shaped by necessity as much as companionship. A man entered it with the understanding that he must provide, sustain, and protect. The ceremony itself carried both sacred and social meaning, placing the new household within the structure of faith and community. Life afterwards settled quickly into routine. Work continued, but now it supported more than one. A household required constant attention, food to gather, shelter to maintain, obligations to meet. A man's role within it was steady and demanding, tied directly to the well-being of those who depended on him. With time, children arrived, and with them came a new layer of responsibility. A father guided not only through words, but through example. His labor became instruction, his decisions a form of teaching. Sons learned by watching, just as he once had, while daughters grew within the same structure of care and expectation. Authority within the household rested largely with him, but it was not without strain. It required balance, firmness without excess, guidance without neglect. The success of the household depended on this balance, even when circumstances made it difficult to maintain. Yet within this structure there were moments of quiet warmth, shared meals, small exchanges, the presence of family gathered in one place. These moments did not remove the weight of responsibility, but they gave it meaning. And so, marriage and fatherhood shaped a man into something more than a laborer alone. He became a center of a small world, held together by effort, care, and the steady work of providing for those around him.
In the medieval world, a man's life could be interrupted at any time by the call to war. It did not matter whether he worked the land, shaped iron, or served within a household. When summoned, he was expected to answer. Conflict was never far away, and its arrival often came without warning. The call to arms was usually tied to obligation. Lords required service from those under them, and when disputes arose or war spread across regions, men were gathered quickly. A farmer might leave behind his fields mid-season, a craftsman his tools, each stepping into a role they had not fully prepared for. Preparation was often brief. Weapons varied widely. Some carried swords or spears, others brought tools adapted for fighting. Armor, when available, was worn as protection, though many had little more than basic coverings. What mattered most was presence, not readiness. The journey to conflict was long and uncertain. Men marched across unfamiliar land, carrying what they could. Food was limited, shelter inconsistent, and weather offered no mercy. Camps formed and dissolved as needed, filled with waiting as much as movement. When battle came, it brought confusion more than clarity. Noise, motion, and fear combined into something overwhelming. Commands were given, but not always heard. Lines formed and broke. In such moments, survival depended as much on chance as on skill.
Not all who were summoned fought directly. Some supported from the edges, carrying supplies, tending animals, maintaining equipment. Yet even they lived within the presence of danger, aware that violence could reach them at any moment. For those who returned, the experience lingered. Life resumed, but not unchanged. The memory of conflict remained, shaping how a man saw both his work and the fragile nature of life itself. And so the summons to war stood as a reminder that peace was never fully secure. It existed only until it was called away.
War brought together men from different paths, each shaped by their own place in the world. Knights, trained soldiers, and common fighters stood side by side, though their experiences often differed before the battle began. Knights were raised within a system of training that prepared them for conflict. From a young age, they learned to ride, to fight, and to carry themselves with discipline. Their armor and weapons reflected both protection and identity. Yet even with preparation, battle remained uncertain. Soldiers who were not of noble birth learned through experience. They relied on formation, discipline, and shared movement to survive. Their strength came not from individual skill alone, but from their ability to act as part of a larger whole. On campaign, differences blurred. All endured the same marches, the same hunger, the same waiting. Camps were filled with a mix of men whose lives had rarely crossed before, now bound together by shared uncertainty. In battle, distinctions mattered less than survival. Chaos reduced structure, and outcomes often depended on moments too brief to control. A single movement, a sudden break, a shift in direction, these could decide everything. When conflict ended, those who remained carried it forward differently. Some returned to their former lives, others stayed within the world of war. But all who had stood within it understood something the same, that life could change in an instant. Order in the medieval world was not only maintained through authority, but through the constant presence of community. Law was not distant, it lived within daily life, shaped by custom, memory, and expectation. Disputes arose from ordinary matters, land, trade, agreements, or moments of anger. When they did, they were brought before those in authority, lords, officials, or community leaders. Judgment varied, shaped as much by circumstance as by rule. Punishment was often visible. Fines were common, taking from a man's resources. Public penalties served as reminders to others, reinforcing the boundaries that held society together. These moments were not hidden, they were meant to be seen. Yet beyond formal judgment, reputation carried its own weight. A man known for honesty might be trusted more easily. One known for trouble might find himself judged more harshly. Reputation shaped opportunity, relationships, and standing within the community. This made daily conduct important in ways that extended beyond the moment. Actions were remembered, and memory influenced how others responded over time. A man's name became part of his identity, carrying meaning beyond his presence. Still, not all disputes ended in punishment. Many were resolved through agreement, negotiation, or compromise. Stability often depended on resolution rather than severity. And so men lived with an awareness that their actions were never entirely private. Life unfolded within a structure of observation where both law and reputation guided the path forward. While many men lived within familiar boundaries, others found themselves drawn beyond them. Travel was rarely undertaken lightly, for the world beyond home was uncertain and often difficult. Merchants moved between places, carrying goods from one region to another. Their lives were shaped by roads, markets, and exchange. Each journey held risk, but also opportunity. Sailors traveled along rivers and seas, guided by wind and current. Their work demanded constant attention, as conditions could change quickly. Water connected distant places, but it also separated them with danger. Pilgrims traveled for faith, walking long distances towards sacred sites. Their journeys were acts of devotion, shaped by endurance and belief. Along the way, they met others traveling for the same purpose, forming temporary communities. Messengers and envoys moved with urgency, carrying words between places. Their paths required speed and caution, often crossing unfamiliar ground. Some men traveled simply to find work or escape hardship. Their journeys were uncertain, shaped by necessity rather than choice. Travel itself was slow. Roads were uneven, weather unpredictable, and distances long. Yet those who journeyed saw more than those who stayed: new places, new customs, and the wider shape of the world. And always there was the thought of return. Home remained the center, even when far away.
Age came gradually, marked not by sudden change, but by the accumulation of years. The body, shaped by labor, began to slow, even as life continued unchanged around it. Work did not disappear, but it shifted. Tasks once done with ease required more effort. Strength gave way to experience, and roles adjusted accordingly. Older men often guided rather than carried. In fields, workshops, or households, they passed on knowledge gathered through years of repetition. Their value remained, though its form changed. The body bore its history: scarred hands, worn joints, slower movement. These were not seen as separate from life, but as part of its course. With age came memory. Seasons repeated, and patterns became clearer. Experience offered understanding that could not be learned quickly. Others looked to older men for guidance, recognizing the weight of what they had lived through. Respect grew not from strength, but from endurance. Yet life remained tied to necessity. Even in age, there was work to be done, though lessened in intensity. And so aging was not an end, but a shift, a movement from doing toward remembering, from strength toward understanding. Loss was a constant presence, appearing in different forms throughout a man's life. It was learned early and carried quietly, becoming part of the inner world. Family members, friends, and neighbors could be lost to illness, hardship, or war. Each absence left a mark, though life continued forward without pause. Grief was rarely spoken of openly. Instead, it settled inward, carried alongside daily responsibilities. A man was expected to endure, even when burdened. Loneliness could exist even among others. Surrounded by family or community, a man might still carry thoughts and memories that remained unshared. Small moments offered some relief: a conversation, a shared silence, a familiar presence. These did not remove sorrow, but they softened it. Faith provided structure, giving meaning to loss and a way to understand it within a larger frame.
Over time, these experiences shaped how a man moved through life. Loss became something familiar, not because it was easy, but because it was constant. And so inner burdens were carried quietly, woven into the rhythm of existence.
Amid constant labor, there were moments when life softened. Feast days brought pause, allowing communities to gather and celebrate. Work slowed, and people came together in shared spaces. Food was more abundant, voices louder, and movement freer. These moments stood apart from the ordinary rhythm. Music, games, and conversation filled the air. For a time, the weight of daily life eased, replaced by connection and shared experience. Even outside of celebration, small joys appeared. A good harvest, a finished task, a moment of rest. Each offered quiet satisfaction. These moments were brief, but meaningful. They reminded men that life was not only endurance, but also presence. And so, joy existed not in large abundance, but in small, steady forms.
The end of life often came gradually, marked by illness that weakened the body over time. What began as small discomfort could grow into something that could not be reversed. Care was given within the home. Family gathered, tending to the man as best they could. The rhythm of life slowed around him. As strength faded, his role shifted from action to presence. He observed more than he participated, watching life continue around him. A priest might be called, offering prayers and final rites. These moments gave structure to the approaching end. Family remained close, sharing the final hours in quiet understanding. Words, when spoken, carried weight. When death came, it did so without ceremony, beyond stillness. The body rested, and those around him recognized the passing. It was not an interruption, but a continuation of the same cycle that had shaped all life before it. After death, life continued. The world did not stop, though something within it had changed. The man was buried, returned to the earth as tradition required. The ceremony was simple, shaped by faith and community. Within the household, roles shifted. Others took on what he had once carried. Life adjusted, guided by necessity. His presence remained in small ways, tools, spaces, habits carried forward by others. Memory lived not in records, but in people. Over time, even memory softened. Names faded, but influence remained in quieter forms. The life he had lived became part of something larger, woven into the ongoing rhythm of work, family, and survival. And so what remained was not only absence, but continuation, a world shaped in unseen ways by those who had passed through it.